To be back with you guys. I'm not going to lie. I was at a great service last Sunday morning after a hard conference, which you'll hear more about, but probably not from here. I just don't think it will do any good to share things from here. We'll probably have a time where we'll say, if you want to know more of some things going on in the Church of God and just some different stuff, I'd rather have it in more of a sit-down discussion type setting than this, because as I experienced in that moment, if one person just shares it and everybody hears it, everybody gets to take whatever they want from it and goes everywhere. And so it becomes difficult. And so I'm still processing a lot of it. There was a lot of late night conversations. It was, as far as rest and relaxation, it was the opposite of vacation with Leanne in Hawaii. It was very tiring, and then it was a long, fun road back that I won't choose again between delayed flights and flat tires and everything else. Got home quite a bit later than was expected. So still just processing a lot of that. But the service and the worship services were wonderful. And last Sunday couldn't have been any better, any more powerful. In fact, my hope is somehow to get a hold of a copy of that last message and present it for you guys sometime. It was very powerful. Not just the message itself, but who delivered it and why, and just the story of their life as well that they had. I'm not sure if they're even making it available anymore for many reasons. We talked to one of the leaders, but if we can, I want to get that for you. So it's one time I would say I was glad I was there, but I always miss you guys. And I do get to listen back and be a part of it. I'm thankful that Craig filled in and shared. I'm going to piggyback on part of that a little bit today, but it's good to be back with you now. And now that we're back and we're out of holidays and we're kind of out of all these breaks, we're going to jump back into where we were before, which is in Matthew chapter 10. So if you'll open to Matthew chapter 10, I'd appreciate it. If you haven't been with us, really now for a year and a half, very simple. I just keep going. I don't know what more to say. More and more even in my life and my conversation, my desire is to help in my way that I can, or just see you come to a point where you're pondering Jesus, determine if you actually believe him, and do what he says. And all the extra fluff hopefully will help get to that point, but that's really what it comes down to. And I kind of believe that when we stand in front of him on that day, he's really not going to care. I mean, I think it's important, so don't hear me wrong. I think it helps. But it's not going to be how many times we can say we went to church and how many times we did this and how many of this here. He's just going to want to know, did you believe me and did you follow me? And that's what he's looking for. And hopefully that's what all of this leads to. And so we're just going to just continue to look at what he said and what he did and go from there and just encourage you to do that. That's all I can do, and then the rest is on you, actually, as to where you're going to go with it. And I do want to say, though, and I have felt this, especially in this here, some responses that we've got, but in this moment we're at now, in fact, let's just read a little bit of it, if you would, with me, in Matthew chapter 10, and then I'll stop before this here, because I want to share something else, but you'll see why I'm going to say this. Matthew, sorry, I should have had my own Bible open. Matthew chapter 10, it says, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. So quickly recapping, Jesus, as he's been walking with his disciples, he's been teaching, he's been sharing, comes to a point where he says, okay, guys, it's time to put some of this into action. So he calls them to him. And again, we just cannot overlook that. He calls them. He doesn't demand them. He doesn't force them. He calls them. He gives them the opportunity to answer the phone, to answer the call, and come to him. But he calls them to him, because everything we do needs to start coming from him. Not coming from the pastor, not coming from your favorite national speaker, not coming from your favorite worship team, not coming from the favorite book that we've read. It needs to start with him. Hopefully, again, all those things hopefully lead back to him. But it starts with him. Read the beginning of Colossians again. Read the beginning of John's letter. It's a reminder that everything centers around Jesus. And it starts with him. And if we're not starting in him and then going from there, we're going to be off base. The plane, well, as we just found out this last week, some might end up in the wrong airports, okay? Because we're going to be off course a little bit. So it starts there. He calls them to him. He gave them authority, because that's what he gives those who follow him, is authority. It can be a scary thing because we so easily abuse authority. But he gave them the ability, he gave them the power, he gave them the strength to help influence thoughts and opinions with truth. He gave them that. We are not weak. We're not weak people. We shouldn't be weak people. We have not timidity and fear, but a power and love and self-discipline is what the Spirit that He's given us. Power is one of those. You have a power. Not long ago, not to get all into it, there was something that we were dealing with at the well, someone we were talking to, where we were so timid and fearful to have a hard conversation with somebody because we were worried about what might happen, what might get put on social media, what might take place. And finally had the conversation, and I was amazed when I walked away and got a response later saying, I really appreciate the conversation. You helped me think outside the box. Instead of them beating on us at actually having a simple conversation actually did something with them. And we tend to forget. We're so scared. We feel like we've been pushed aside so far that we forget. No, actually, when we're walking with Jesus, we have a power that we don't know, even in what we share. We don't know what it's going to do because He gives us authority. And He gives it to anybody, like these 12 apostles who I'm not going to read, but these were ordinary, messed up, fallen short men. That's who He's calling. That's who He's sending out. That's who He's giving authority to. So none of us have any excuse to say, not me. Because all these guys represent one of us in some way or another. And it says, Jesus sent out these 12 with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or any other town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. And as you go, proclaim this message that the kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely give, freely you've received, freely give. Don't get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts, no bag for the journey, no extra shirt or sandals or staff, because a worker is worth his keep. That's where we've ended. He's saying, go, don't take a bunch of extra stuff, go where I'm sending you to go. I know, and again, it sounds harsh in here, but these guys were on a limited time, so he's saying, I don't want you going over here, time is short, I'm directing you over here, which He will often do. Again, we've been told and trained to just be open to everybody, and we should. We should love everybody. We should show grace. We should be available. But when He gives us a call, sometimes it's specific. He said, this is where I want you. Well, what about, no, I've got somebody for that. This is where I want you. And so He tells them, I want you going here. And don't take a bunch of extra stuff that's going to distract you, that's going to hinder you, that's going to hold you down. Just go trusting me, and I'll take care of you. And that's where we've been so far on this. Now, where I want to, before we go into the rest of this today, what I want to tell you, and I say this for a reason, sometimes we can jump into these moments, and we may be sitting in this pew right now, or we may be sitting in a chair in the back right now, going, man, that is intense. And I don't know about me. I want to tell you, number one, you're loved. Number two, Jesus died for you as well. And number three, He created you for a reason. Fearfully, wonderfully made, knit together in your mother's womb. All the days ordained for you were written before one of them came to be, David says. And so, this is part of that. If we're sitting here listening and go, man, I'm still just struggling with even believing He cares about me, I'm telling you right now, He cares about you. This isn't just all about do. Let's remember where we're starting from. We're being sent out by somebody who loves us. There is not one person in this room who is an accident. Surprise to the parents maybe, but not an accident. And not a surprise to God. Okay? Nobody. So you are part of all this. For God so loved the world includes you. Everybody in this room. And so when we get into being sent out and some of these things that seem so hard, know that He believes it can be done. And He's calling it on you. He's giving you that mission as well. I've screwed up so many times. I don't care. You're here now. And He cares. And He has you here now for a reason. This is not a surprise to Him that you're here today. Nobody slipped in those doors. You might have got past Craig, you didn't get past God. He knows you're here. Okay? So I want to set that up because that's where we're starting from is He cares about you, He loves you, and He has this for you as well. And not only that, just like these disciples, He wouldn't give it to you if you didn't believe you could do it. Okay, so that's all that's there, and now we go into where He goes from that, because now we've been to where don't take any copper in your belts, no bag for the journey, no extra shirt, sandals, staff, all that. You'll get taken care of. And then we get into some more where I almost wanted to skip over this. In fact, because I thought, I don't know how this really exactly applies to us, but I just feel like we can't skip over some words of Jesus, even if there's not as much. But there's one part in particular that I think is very good for us to hear and apply even in our call that we have today, in the time that we have living on this earth today, and the mission that he's giving us today. But as we read on, he says, whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person, and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Truly, I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. So I'm reading this part here, and I'm actually kind of glad we got a couple extra weeks before we even have to talk about it. So I'm just going, where do we go with that here? Let's just break this down for a few moments today, because I think there's still a lot of importance in this call he gave to them and how it can relate to us today. First of all, he says, whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person. In a way, honestly, this sounds superficial to me. Like, go and look for somebody worthy and hang out like that. But like it or not, what we need to remember is who we align ourselves with can sometimes enhance our youthfulness, and it can definitely and often hinder it. And at the same time that Jesus was spiritual and the Son of God and all that, he's also very practical. And he knows that he's saying, as you're going out, I'm going to tell you, look for somebody, some worthy person or house. We live in a small town. Everybody know that? I know we've got Lift Up Waukene, we got Why Not Waukene, we've got the Kansas Main Street. We're trying to grow, but right now we're small. And there are some people, when someone is hanging out with them, that other people are going, I don't think you ought to be doing that. And if we're being completely honest, we end up judging. So if I go and I hang out with somebody and I align myself with somebody that we don't agree with, that whether it be morally or spiritually or whatever, their reputation isn't really great, and we don't consider them worthy in a town, and I go align myself with them, I've automatically hindered what I can do as well, because people are already going, well, if he's with them, then I don't know if I'm going to listen to him. I'm not saying it's right, but this is not the followers of Jesus we're talking about. I know we're not called to judge, but come on. He's talking to the followers of Jesus. People judge. I know we say we live in tolerance, which tolerance is interesting. We're only tolerant if they agree with us, and then we're not tolerant, and then we just judge them, and we say they're wrong. That's the world we live in. So whether we like it or not, Jesus knows that it's important that when you go somewhere, align yourself with someone else who, in our words, we could say, has respect. The people actually are thinking, okay, if we're aligning with them, and again, I almost hate to say it because it sounds so superficial, but I think Jesus understands that you never even get a foot in the door if you're going and you're not, and again, this isn't about not talking to people that aren't. It's not about not witnessing to people that aren't. It's not talking about not serving and loving. It's aligning ourselves up with them. Where he's going, when you go, so you even have an opportunity, look for a worthy person or home, because if you don't, like it or not, you could get written off before you ever even get a chance to share anything or do anything. I love how the commentator, William Barclay, writes this. You're going to hear a lot from him because he just does a good job in this section. But he says, when they entered a city or a village, they were to seek a house that is worthy. The point is that if they took up their residence in a house which had an evil reputation for morals or for conduct or for fellowship, it would seriously hinder their usefulness. They were not to identify themselves with anyone who might prove to be a handicap. He says, that is not for a moment to say that they are not to seek to win such people for Christ, but it is to say that the messenger of Christ must have a care whom he makes his intimate friend. Jesus is being very clear that as you're going on your call, it's important to consider who we are aligning with. I'm not going to say the rest, I'll just end up in trouble. So just leave it with that, okay? Again, you almost want to skip it because you're like, man, Jesus, that just sounds superficial. It sounds like the way everybody else is going. No, I'm just looking out. I'm giving you your foot in the door. Look for that worthy person, that worthy home. And then he says, and stay at their house until you leave. When they entered a house, they were to stay there until they moved on to another place, both as a matter of courtesy in the culture in which they lived, but also because they might be tempted after they'd won certain supporters or certain converts in a place to move on to another house which could provide more luxury and more comfort and a better environment. In today's world, I'm pretty sure we call this, they might be climbing the ladder to something more. They might be taking a stepping stone opportunity, or they might be moving on to something bigger and better. And Jesus is saying, don't do that. Go where I send you, find that, and stay with it. Believe it or not, I know, again, it's really hard because it's so inundated. It is not on us to try and keep moving up the ladder. It's on God to do what he's going to do from there. He's just saying, go where I send you and be faithful there. Let me deal with the rest. Don't go looking for, hey, if I get my foot in the door here and I get this, then maybe I can get to go there. And I wish I could say that that doesn't happen, but even in pastoral ministry, that happens all the time. Move on. I'm taking this so that I can get a stepping stone. It's especially, you hear it so much in the youth ministry world, they're getting into youth ministry as a stepping stone into pastoral ministry someday. Because we have that kind of mentality. That's the world we're inundated with. I can tell you now, when we first got back here, and again, everything, the way it worked out to be here, when we got back here, when people heard we're in Waukene and gone from what was going on in Oregon, and I don't say this to be arrogant, but in that sense, we were moving up the ladder. Going back to see these guys here in Tampa, seeing a bunch of Oregon friends, I don't know how many of them said, so when are you moving home? Ready to have you back. There was opportunities that were available. There was a lot going there. So when we came back here and they heard we're in a church in Waukene, Kansas, first of all, they're like, wow, what? How do you say that? Like, what's the name of it? And I don't know how many times I heard somebody say, you're made for bigger and better from the church. From church people, and I always be like, what does bigger and better even mean? If I'm called here, we're called here, but that mentality that we have, and the thing I often like to quote is Nazareth. What good can come out of Nazareth? Because they had the mentality back then. How can something like that come out of something like that? We're so inundated with this that we have this desire to keep moving up that ladder for a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and Jesus is going, no, when you go to where I call you, just go and stay there until we get to the next thing that he says, but stay there. Do not use that as a next step in the process. Do not use that as the next stepping stone opportunity. Find a worthy person, find a worthy home, and stay at their house until you leave. The messenger of Christ must never give the impression that he courts people for the sake of material things and that his movements are dictated by the demands of his own comforts. Where we are sent, regardless of the personal benefits. Our purpose comes from our love of God and from God and our love for people. And if we will keep this in mind, the temptation for more doesn't get such a strong of a hold on us. Just so you guys know, I love being here most of the time. I love being here. I will say I don't love living in a small town all the time. I do enjoy the city. I'm just built that way. When I go back, I love to see what's in the city. I love the opportunities there. I even love other than Tampa, Florida, man, they honk a lot, and I can't even figure out what they're honking at. Like literally somebody honked at somebody, and we all turn around, and they're just driving. I don't love all that, but I love the city. I love getting to do that. But what those people don't see because of the things that's built in them is how great the group is that's here. And the opportunities that are here because we have that there. And we can't let people's views or people's opinions mess with us on the call that we have. Stay where we're at until, again, we're going to get in here in a minute. We'll see here until he says otherwise. But before he gets there, he says, from there, don't go find that worthy person, align yourself with them, stay where I've sent you, Quit trying to move up the ladder. Quit trying to do the stepping stone thing. Quit trying to do all that. Just do what I've called you to do. And then he says, as you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. And if it's not, let your peace return to you. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to get into this because, to be honest, I don't really understand enough of it to do so. All I can tell you was an Eastern culture thing. And sometimes Jesus actually did use the culture of that time to relate and talk to the people there. And so I don't know how we can necessarily translate that to what we do today. But he shares that with them. And then he goes on and says, and this is where I want to camp for a few more minutes today. Because after everything I just told you, find that worthy person, that worthy home. Align yourselves with them. Don't use it as a stepping stone. Stay there until, he says, if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Now, when I say we got to listen to the words of Jesus, these are one of those moments where like, whoa, that does not sound like the Jesus I know. So we tend to kind of either do two things. We either take it and we take it to the personal feelings we have about something. We're like, sweet Jesus, you can tell me I get to shake my dust off their feet and leave them behind in it. Or we go, man, did he really say that? Well, I'm going to tell you, Jesus said it. In the midst of all this, after everything he shared, he comes to a point where he says, if anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. We've got to be clear as we dig into this. Jesus just said what he said. And just because we may struggle with it or to comprehend it, because of how we think about Jesus, we cannot dismiss what Jesus just said here. He gave the disciples the permission to not only leave the place where they were not being heard and accepted, he even told them to shake the dust off their feet as they were going out. And this seems harsh when we really understand what he just did, because the disciples, when they heard this from him, would have most likely been thinking about a regular process they would take after crossing over from a Gentile land back into their own country. That's what would have been going through their mind. In this process, when they would go to a Gentile land, which you remember, they did not associate with them. Those guys were bad. Those guys would, you think of the worst things we say about the people we dislike the most and take that and put it on steroids, and that's what these guys thought about them. And so when they would go to that Gentile land and they would cross back over, this was a process they would go through. They would shake the dust of the Gentile roads off their feet so that the last particle of pollution might be cleansed away. They didn't want any part of that dirt on them when they entered their homeland. And you have to understand, when Jesus shares this right here, that's what's going through the disciples' minds. That's very likely what they were hearing when they heard these words. And it was to them as though Jesus was saying, if a city or village will not receive you, you must treat it like you do a Gentile place. And we have to be real to know that that was probably going through their mind, because Jesus still said it regardless. But I think we do need to dig in and just think of Jesus as a whole and who he was and everything that was about him, and take the reality of what he said and be careful with it. Because on the one hand, Jesus probably didn't mean it quite as harshly as it seemed, but on the other hand, he said it knowing what they'd have been thinking. He said it knowing, and he said it probably knowing that it was going to come across pretty harsh, which would leave us to have to ask the question, why would he have said this? Why would he have shared this? What can this kind of instruction mean for us today? What can we glean from it? And first of all, the reason I think he might have said it again was written very well by William Barclay in his commentary when he writes, Jesus was not saying that certain people had to be abandoned as being outside the message of the gospel and beyond the reach of grace. This was an instruction like the opening instruction not to go to the Gentiles and to the Samaritans. It came from the situation in which it was given. It was simply due to the time factor. Time was short. As many as possible must hear the proclamation of the kingdom. There was not time then to argue with the disputatious and to seek to win the stubborn. That was going to come later. And we want to do that. When someone doesn't agree with us, we want to stay in that place and keep arguing and keep going and keep trying to, and maybe in passion, keep trying to win them to our side, keep trying to get them to see the truth. And in this moment, remember, Jesus is sending them out for a while, not for a lifetime. And there wasn't time to do all that. It was more about get out, get as much as you can, get the word around, spread the message. At this moment, the disciples had to tour the country as quickly as possible, and so therefore they had to move on when there was no immediate welcome for the message which they brought. And since we can so easily get caught up into focusing on why someone may or may not accept us to the point that may or may not accept the message that we got, we can get stuck in that. We can let it drive us. We can be like, why are they not accepting this? And we can let it just almost obsess, just take over. So Jesus is going, no. At this point, you just have to realize they didn't get it, so shake that off. Shake the dust off your feet right now. And so I think he used that term very intentionally because he knew that they would be thinking, just get it all out. You've done your part. It's time to move off. Shake it off your feet, and you move on. You keep going because time is short. This is not a, you're not good enough because you didn't hear it shaking off. This is not a, you're dirt like they thought of the Gentiles shaking off. It's more about just saying, I've got to wipe this off. I've got to let it go. I can't let it consume me. I can't let it keep getting there because there's more in this mission that he has for me, and I've got to keep going. In a sense, even though this isn't exactly what Paul meant when he wrote it, it's the same idea as when Paul says, forgetting what is behind and straining towards what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. And in order to do that, sometimes we got to, in the words of Taylor Swift, shake it off. Shake it off. And keep going. And Jesus is trying to make a point. He's trying to get their attention to say, don't dwell in it, because that's what we do as humans. But that being said, I feel like there's a little more truth and preparation buried in these instructions. I don't think that we today can just go with that and ignore all that was said and just write it all off as a moment, because I think there's more to consider with the calling that he's giving to us. There's more truth in this that is good for us to see when he calls us and he sends us out. The other thing that almost gets lost in this that we're seeing here, that Jesus is basically sharing with them when he shares these words, is the reality that just because Jesus calls us to something or someplace does not mean that it's going to be successful. We can't lose that. That's partly why we dwell in it for so long when it doesn't happen, because it's supposed to be successful. It's supposed to be blessed. It's supposed to work. Jesus called me to this. This can't be. That's why he has to say, just shake it off. It's okay. Because we're so trained to be like, if we got called by God, if he's sending us out there, then we're going to be successful and blessed. And sometimes when Jesus calls us someplace, it's not going to be successful, or especially looks in the way that we think it should look. Man, you try and say that a lot, bad things are going to come out. The reality is that even though it was from Jesus, they were being sent out on a mission to share the good news and lead people to follow him and live in his kingdom. There were some who simply weren't going to listen to it. They weren't going to listen to it. They weren't going to hear it. They weren't going to have it. And they definitely weren't going to follow the path that the disciples were encouraging. So in a sense, it sounds crazy, but Jesus was literally sending them out to a mission that he already knew was going to fail at some point in some places. And that's hard for us to grasp, but we got to realize in what he's saying here, that's what he is saying. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes, in our case, the message may seem to get through for a while, but just becomes ineffective later. Sometimes it falls on deaf ears. And what Jesus is trying to share in here, when this happens, instead of beating ourselves up or giving up on God, Jesus gives us permission or even recognition or even encouragement to realize there's a time to call it good and to move on. To just call it good and move on, which again is difficult. Because for many of us, and myself included, we've been taught so long to be loyal, to stick with it, to persevere, to keep going on no matter what. And it's really hard to accept the concept of going, sometimes you just got to move on. Without, again, getting too much into it, I've been at a couple places where you knew it was time. You knew it was time. My struggle was saying, okay, it's time. Fortunately, I had someone who was feeling like it was time. and was able to be honest enough to say, it's time. But I can tell you, we argued about it a long time before I realized it was time to go. Because, again, we're just taught so much on it, but sometimes he's going, it's time to go. I've got something else, or as we'll share in a minute, someone else. But it's time to go. And when I was at River Street, that's probably the most clear. When I started hearing messages of what the people were saying that they wanted, it became very evident that that's not me. That's not me. It's time. My message is not getting through anymore, what he's sharing through me, I should say, is not getting through anymore. You need to hear or have somebody else in this position. And while in Tampa, I got to meet with the guy that followed me there. He didn't know I was there, and I didn't know he was there. We were in a GA meeting, and he did what I felt like doing and got up and left before it was over. And I was like, hey, it's Matt, and got to see him. And we went and sat and had a coffee together and got to talk. And he came in as the person they were looking for and did what he could do for 7 years. And then guess what? It was time. And we shared about that. But part of his struggle, as he shared with me, was it was time before he realized it was time. And sometimes more damage can be done when we don't realize, and because we keep fighting for it, and he's giving us permission to say, no, it's time. Move on. Now, for those that love to be, have no problem leaving at the first sign of trouble, or they didn't want to be there in the first place, so it becomes confirmation for them too, that doesn't give an excuse to be like, oh, nope, doesn't work, I'm out. Because we have some that the minute doesn't go the way they want, peace out, I'm done. He's not calling for that either. He's saying when it comes to a point where the message is not that I've given through you or whatever it may be, whether it's in a personal relationship with somebody, whether it's in a position, whatever in this call, when it's not getting through, it's time to start thinking about whether it's time. And that's okay to go. It's okay to do that. He's given that, and that's hard for us to think again because that's just not how we're doing it. But what we have to remember that when that time comes, that's where what Craig shared last week, the posture with which we go. The posture with that transition takes place, the posture with which we actually consider how we're responding becomes important. That's why I love, Cindy, what's the name of the guy that wrote the message? I just forgot his name. Man, I'm having Eugene Peterson. He's passed away. I love his translation of this. He says, if they don't welcome you, quietly withdraw. Don't make a scene, shrug your shoulders, and be on your way. Because we have permission when that happens. So in your call, where you're at, it's okay. Don't talk bad about them on the way out. Don't call them idiots because they don't get it. Don't even shake the head because they haven't cut the hair right and worn the right clothes and got on board yet. Don't do that stuff. Just know that my message isn't getting through. So I'm going to go. It's time to move on. And recognize that it's not necessarily a failure if it doesn't work. In fact, it may be good to recognize that the end result might be better if we left and we got out of the way. Because there may be somebody else that he's bringing in that can do the next part. There may be somebody else that's sharing the next part of the message. It's the whole concept that Paul tried to get through when he says, I planted the seeds, Apollos watered them, but God made them sprout, and he made them grow. So in here he's saying, hey, sometimes it's not going to work. And when it gets to that place, it's okay to go. And then as we go, we can have the posture we need. We can have the posture he's calling for if we just remember that once we moved on, God will take care of it from there. It's on his hands. It's in his hands. And again, it sounds harsh in how he says it, but he says, truly I tell you, it'll be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment for that town. Maybe if we recognize that there will be a judgment, it is going to happen, there's going to be a judgment in the end, but it's not on us to make that determination. God's got it. God will take care of it. God will continue to be involved. He'll resolve the situation one way or another. If he wants to continue giving them opportunities, he's going to send people to keep giving them opportunities. If he says, I've given them the opportunities, they've had the chance, here it comes, like Sodom and Gomorrah, then he'll make that decision, but it's in God's hands, not ours. And we don't need to pray for that for him either, and we, again, don't need to say, we just need to know that, hey, I've gone where he told me to go. My message that he's given to me to share is now done. I move on, and it's in his hands to do what he's going to do. In here, that's what he's sharing with them. So don't get caught up in trying to argue and fight and go back and forth and eventually hurt the message that I'm trying to share. Go and just realize this and relax in the middle of it. That's basically what he's sharing with these guys right here. Because he will never be done working on them. He'll never give up. He's going to do what he's going to do. And he'll just use us at the part he's ready to use us in that moment on the call that he gives us. So I think that's pretty important. Do you have something you're going to close us with today? Okay. I think that's pretty important for us to look at this moment and see those truths that are in there that he's sharing with them, because it comes and applies to us. I had a whole long thing about a couple missionaries that could prove all this, but I'm not going to share that with you this morning, maybe down the road. But the reality is we're going to be called to some places where we either may not be accepted right away, or eventually the message may run thin. And he's giving us the permission. He's giving us the call to say, I'm going to shake that off and just leave it in his hands. And the ironic thing is, if we will accept that, if we will believe that, if we'll live in that, the burden that we put on ourselves at times to be God when we're not God, but also the irritation and the anger and the judgment that we develop because it's not happening the way we want won't be there. Because we'll be able to go, okay, it didn't happen. It's in your hands, God. It's on you. We won't take things so personally that it affects us. We'll be able to shake it off. So I encourage you to go back and read this again. And then I do encourage you, feels almost sacrilegious, to listen to the words of Taylor Swift as you go. I had to go back and listen to this. If you were to hear me preparing and came into the church that day and I got Taylor Swift playing in my office, I stay out too late, got nothing in my brain. How many of us can relate to that right there? How many actually know the lyrics to this, by the way? How many knew that's what she just said? I stay out too late, got nothing in my brain. That's what people say. That's the part I want you to get. I stay out too late, got nothing in my brain. That's what people say. That's what people say. I go on too many dates, but I can't make them all stay. At least that's what people say. That's what people say, and I'm one of those people. That's what I make fun of Taylor Swift for. Next breakup, new song. I always do that, okay? So that's me. But I keep cruising, can't stop, won't stop moving. It's like I got this music in my mind saying it's going to be all right. I never miss a beat. I'm lightning on my feet, and that's what they don't see. That's what they don't see. And I love this. Player's going to play, 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 play. Hater's going to hate, 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 hate. Hater's going to hate. Baby, I'm just going to shake, 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 shake. I shake it off. I shake it off. Go with that today, okay? That's what he's saying. Because players are going to play, play, play. Haters going to hate, 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 hate. They're going to say all kinds of stuff. Just shake it off. Some of you are like, man, I so bad wish I would have downloaded this song. We just leave to this today. Are you filming this? Seriously? God, help us today, please. Let's pray. God, do help us to just hear this, to just know that even in this moment where it's like, what do we get from that? Just these truths that are in here. Because you, again, are calling each of us somewhere, someplace. We are not here breathing on this earth just to sit here and breathe on this earth. There is something. And even if it's taking place right where we're sitting and we have a hard time moving from, there is something you are calling us to. God, I just pray that, first of all, you would help us to see and to hear and to believe and to understand that. Because, as you said about David, we only have this generation to live the breath you've given us. And quite honestly, each day is one less day we have to live that breath and to live that call before we get to sit with you for eternity and see you just more for who you are and truly be able to worship you in the full. We have this opportunity now. And God, your desire is that we recognize that. Once we recognize that, we can help others recognize that because you love them just as much as you love us. You care about them just as much as you care about us, whoever them may be. So God, help us to hear this. But to know that as we go out, that sometimes it's not going to look successful. It's not going to look like it's doing any good. It's not going to look like it's being blessed by you. And that's okay. Sometimes you're just saying go because that part that we did is part of a bigger plan. And then give us, God, the ability to know, number one, but then just have the freedom, the lack of guilt, the lack of everything else to say, you know what, it's done. To drop our pride when it didn't look like it happened, to say, it's time for me to move on, it's done. And then to be able to just shake it off and leave it in your hands, knowing and trusting that you've got it from here. Knowing that you see the bigger plan, that we might have just planted or we might have watered, but it's you that's going to make it grow in whatever way you're going to do on that call that you've given us. Help us to take that and live in the freedom that comes in that. And God, I do pray that both collectively as a body, as a church, but each person in this room, that they would continue every day maybe to hear a little bit more of what exactly that call is that you're sending them out into. Whether, again, it be in their own home, their workplace, or somewhere far away, or maybe even move that'll be taking place. And help them to hear that so they can experience life to the full as they just live the life that you created for them. Every one of us in here, I pray that we would get to experience that. And thank you for the gift of it. As we go, God, just give us energy to enjoy the rest of this day, to enjoy this weekend. God, I pray for safety. When fireworks are going up, I just pray that you would keep this town, keep this area, keep the people safe. And God, help us to be able to enjoy the celebration of the gift you've given us, not just freedom in you, but in the freedom of the place that we get to live. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Go have a good one. Just don't shake off the message. At least take that. The rest, go.